I was feeling somewhat nervous, I have to say, because it's such a mammoth piece.
I was excited. I woke up like, boom, let's go, like, just ready to go into it.
I'm really looking forward to it. Bartlett Sher reimagining this book on stage is going to be quite something to see.
Quite overexcited, actually. It's my favourite book, or one of my favourites. Changed my life when I read it when I was 13.
I'm really excited to see Aaron Sorkin's spin on it.
I mean, he is one writer that you can kind of go, I have high expectations, and have them delivered.
The actors really, really want to talk to us in person, and they'll be basically asking us to think about what we want to do after we leave the theatre.
You can walk away from a play feeling transformed in some way, because it can be such a visceral experience, and I expect this to happen tonight.
I'm very happy and very exhilarated that we finally got this show open.
We've had 3 weeks of previews and it feels like it's culminated in tonight, and it feels like an amazing end to the last 3 weeks and kind of, I think, excitement about getting on with the show for the next few months.
Just being back in a big theatre with a big audience and on their feet and standing there, it was just extraordinary. Couldn't get over it. I mean, the whole cast were just backstage, were like, what was that all about? That was amazing.
I'm slightly overwhelmed because I've had all my nearest and dearest come and shoot the show tonight, and they loved it, which is really good. So yeah.
I was in the wings and I was like, I'm here. And you know when you envision something and you pray and you want something to happen and it finally happens, and halfway through you're able to pinch yourself. You're like, oh, I'm not dreaming, I'm actually here.
Every night for 8 shows a week, it's full of people, and I think that's sort of testament to what theatre is really. There is something about it that you can't get from sitting in front of a television or, going to the cinema or something. There is something about coming to a room full of strangers and experiencing a story being told.
Each audience has a slightly different personality, so you feel them out, and you sort of I feel like a scout, you're sort of guiding them to be like, okay, I need you to come with me on this. And sometimes you'll get audiences that are like, oh, no, I don't want to go there, I don't want to go there. And you have to be like, no, we have to. This is big, there's an important realization that we all need to make.
Sadly, even now, we don't tell that many stories that are difficult stories to digest. They're difficult stories for us to look at ourselves and realise where our responsibility lies. It's heartening, then when you work on a play like To Kill a Mockingbird, to hear an audience struggling. Because you should. It's a brilliant play. It's a brilliant night at the theatre. But that doesn't mean it's got to be an easy night at the theatre.
It's been interesting to be aware of my own relationship with the audience. I've got my back to them so often. Sometimes I'm grateful I have my back to the audience. And other times I'm curious to know if they would experience the play differently, if they could see the result of those racist slurs, what they do to Tom Robinson.
I think that the question of change and race and justice rings perhaps differently here in England than it does in the United States, obviously. But I think that people's basic sense of wanting to ask these questions is not any different. They really want to engage with a story, which helps them understand that. And the great thing about theater is it's a place where you go to deeply experience your past to make sense of your present.
It's important to get diverse audiences in the theatre because theatre should be accessible to everyone. It shouldn't be a luxury for the few. And this is a very human story.
It's not about whether you sit on the left or the right. It's about whether or not you genuinely believe in the value of human life. And I think that if you've got conservative in one corner, sat next to, I don't know, someone on the radical left, sat next to someone who is of working class background, sat next to someone who is first generation Sri Lankan, suddenly you start realizing that being on this island in the UK is about being from a country that is a mix of all different people.
Community is a big part of it, and community or democracy to work means that it has to have many points of view, and that all the points of view, whether you agree with them or not, have to be able to be heard, even if it's painful.
This play doesn't exist in isolation. It is born of our culture and of our society, and it talks to all of those things, and we are all culpable in what this play is discussing.
When I look at Calpurnia, I feel that what she's taught me, I mean, the first thing I feel is that she has taught me that it is really important that those who have been invisible become visible. A voice that has suffered deserves to be heard and must be heard.
I think the biggest thing that Mayella can teach us is about our own fear. She's terrified, not only of just her father, but that situation is ultimately born out of a fear of change.
I think that when you come across Dale, you think, oh, breath of fresh air, this funny guy, bold and beautiful and sort of has such a zest for life and loves people and incredibly loving. But I think actually, obviously when you crack into that and you find out about his background and you sort of encounter him with his mum, he's treated not well and doesn't have a good life. And so I think you sort of think, how can somebody be so kind and loving when they're not given that in return?
If Tom was looking back at me through a mirror, he'd also be saying that kindness isn't a weakness. Don't be afraid to do the right thing because the consequences or the world tells you otherwise.
There could be the most extraordinary change were Mayella to tell the truth. Yes, it would be incredibly traumatic to sit in that courtroom and tell the truth. You have to be more. You have to think larger than yourself.
Everything Atticus is trying to do is that he's like, there's good in everybody, there is decency in everyone, you just have to get in their skin. You know, Bob Ewell is a good person, you're just not seeing the right side. And you think, well, actually, how can you allow that teaching when you see this little boy who is treated so ill, so badly, but then can still be so good to people? How can you justify it? It's just not how the world works.
Atticus says it wasn't a slip of the tongue. In the heat of the moment, when his life was on the line, when the stakes were at its highest, he could have said something else, but he chose to speak the truth, regardless of the consequences. There's a great strength in that for me. There's a great solace in that, knowing that sometimes the outcome could be disastrous, but you keep that identity, that who you are. You're true to that. There's a beauty in that.
Experiencing the trauma of Mayella initially was almost concerning because I really try to approach my characters as authentically as possible. I immerse myself in their mind, their world. That's where I feel that's my job. But I do think that it bleeds into your life. It certainly bleeds into your life.
I think there are days where I come home and it is really hard to switch off.
We all go and put our bodies and emotions and hearts on the line every night and 8 times a week to tell a story. And the truth is, it comes at a great cost. It does. It's emotionally, mentally, physically very, very draining. I'm very lucky to be able to do it, to get this opportunity. But it's a big thing.
It's okay that it follows me. It's okay to be affected by it. It's okay to keep thinking about it. Because nothing gets sorted if you always just disengage from it. It's okay that it is an active part of my life right now.
Elements of Calpurnia I can leave behind, but our worlds meet in terms of I totally understand and have an affinity to where she's coming from and what she's actually going through.
I guess the sensation of injustice, the unfairness of what happens to Tom, that I can leave. I can leave that behind. What I find a little bit harder to leave behind is the exhaustion of having to defend yourself every night. That can wear on you. That's mentally, physically, emotionally draining. Fighting for your life 8 times a week.
Because I often think that when we take on roles or have stories to tell, that the timing of it is right for our life at that moment. And I always ask myself, why? Why am I playing this now? And why am I in this environment playing this? And with this, I think it's an opportunity to use the word release, I think you used that word, but to release myself from that trauma.
The way I handle the content of this show and the words that I said in the show is by looking at my fellow Black people. We look to each other for solidarity. We look to each other for comfort. And we look to each other for strength.
The beginning of the play, just before the curtain goes up, the cast kind of meet. And the members of the global majority cast, we then gather together. I think one of the beautiful things about this job is the deep appreciation we have, I'd say, found again in terms of who we are as a people. And allowing that appreciation to happen without apology.
So much of this play, for me, is about little acts of rebellion, little acts of revolution. That moment we have, you don't see that in the play. It's not shown. That's a small way in which we can claim something back for ourselves.
Without that moment, I don't think I could go on that stage, to be honest. Because that moment is the moment that we all acknowledge the world that we're going into. We all acknowledge with each other to say, I got you, I got you, I got you. We're not alone. And it carries us all the way through, right to the very end.
It just lets you know that you're not alone, because that's the thing about racism. And the racism in this play, it makes you feel alone, compounded by the fact that you're on the witness stand with the gaze on you. It's incredibly lonely. So those moments before, during, and after the show are just little moments where you can, it's so wonderful to be held, to feel like you're connected to people who are going through something similar. And we never get a chance to, it's not written in the play, so we don't get a chance to show that, but we keep that for ourselves.
You know, we can look at, like, obviously the emotional crux of the play is incredibly impactful, and the Black characters in the play are representative of those historical injustices. You know, if you think, oh, I'm a liberal person, I'm an empathetic person, it can be easy to look at those characters, and I mean in life as well, look at George Floyd as a man and not look beyond that. And I think that does a disservice to what needs to be done, because it's not just a tragedy, it's systemic.
It's really sort of, I think, made me very aware that these are things that you can't just, we're not just saying this story and then people to then be like, oh, it's this is like a bad thing that's like happened or is like happening somewhere. It's like, no, it's happening like here, now, today, somewhere, right now, in this country, in this city, these things are happening, like this is happening.
I have tried to educate myself, but I think this play has really made me realise that actually that has to be a much more monumental part of our society. We got it wrong for a long, long time, but to make it better, we've got to accept that we are culpable. It really does require us all to do work.